First of all, we're going to spend some time talking about the power of you and why I think, and hopefully you will realize, how important you are in the workplace to managing not only this problem, but also to helping establish much more high-quality working environments. That it is very much related to the people in the institution. And then we'll spend a lot of time working with, thinking about, okay, how do you decide to engage? How do you decide to become involved? How do you decide to move from from observing to actually taking some kind of action, and what might that action look like? And then to do some practicing and thinking about it within some scenarios. We got tons of scenarios for you guys to try out. Put yourself in that situation, brainstorm some ideas based on some of the framework that I'll give you. And then, pending the time, I like to throw it open at the end. If there is I'm ready to be a consultant for you, or to give you some ideas based on my experience and the work that I've done with other universities, and my colleague Joel Newman, who is someone that I work a lot with. He's at SUNY New Paltz, and I'm happy to share whatever kind of information. I also am being cognizant that I'm being videotaped, so I gotta make sure I don't say anything negative about my dean. Hi, Matt. And not talk about my institution. So if I say another institution, many times that's true, but you and I know it might be something else. All right, so let's get started. One of the things that I like to do when I work with a university or present at a university is find out what they're saying about themselves and what they're sharing with the public about themselves. So websites are a really great resource for looking at that. And so I spent some time noodling around the university website and came across the vision for 2013, which I believe that document, the framing document, was 2006, and it's about a 25-year plan. I'm looking around at some of the folks who may have been here and have been here during that time. And setting the vision, and I talk about these as your touchstones, because this is what your institution, your institutional voice is saying is important. And therefore, any actions that occur within the institution, I think it's quite legitimate to say, how does that action allow us to, for example, promote what we say we want to promote? A welcoming, conducive, constructive environment for positive personal growth. Are the actions that we're taking, either as people in the organization or in our policies and our practices, those kinds of activities, are they helping us move in that direction? Another part of the vision had to do with very core initiatives. And the specific example of the initiative, again, is number 7, fostering a supportive and more inclusive community on campus. Again, one of your touchstones. And one of the things the document talks about is the kinds of questions that they have to be pursuing and understanding. So how can we ensure that everybody on our campus feels welcomed and feels included? And how can we enhance the quality of the overall environment? So, as an institution, you have made a public statement that these are important to you. And that's important to you as people in this organization, because as things go on, particularly as we think about workplace bullying, you can reflect on that and say, workplace bullying does not permit us to do this. It interferes with our capacity to do this. So it builds a will and a capacity within the institution to say we have to address these kinds of issues. Okay? So you guys are looking good publicly. You got some cool policies and procedures. We'll talk about some of them a little bit later, and what some of the issues are. The other thing I find interesting about your organization, your university, is it gathers data it asks you for your input. So how many of you responded to the campus climate survey? Right, see, you're being asked for your, how many of you responded to the employee engagement survey? Yeah, the institution is asking for your input. I think that's important. Now, do you ever get feedback on the data? Do you ever get told, okay, well, that's missing part of the loop. Let me just show you a little bit about what's showing up on your website and how it ties into what we're doing today. On items like, you were asked, do you know the resources available to report unprofessional and unethical conduct? Majority of people said, yes, I do. The majority of people said, yes, I would. I would report this. So I'm excited about that you see unprofessional and unethical conduct, and you know where to go, and you would report. I also want to suggest that might be a slightly inflated number. And the thing in the brackets are indicating people who said no, they would not. And then the third item is, my department responds appropriately. And not as many of you are sure that that's actually what's going to happen. So you're pretty certain about what you know you need to do and that you would report, but you're not too sure about the rest of your unit. Okay, so you're telling us that there's resources here, that you would use them, but you're not really sure that they're being applied appropriately. That's why we're going to talk about you. Because you're the ones who are aware of what's going on, and you're the ones who can have a phenomenal impact, and also we can start holding our units accountable and responsible for engaging those resources that you say are there. So let's do a pre-test. How many of you have done some studies and whatnot? You know, we like to do baseline, baselining. And then after the experience, we like to do where are we now, okay? So what I'd like you to do is to think about this question and then rate yourself on a scale from 1 to 10. And the question is, if you witness bullying behavior, what is your confidence level? What level of confidence do you have that you will take action to address workplace bullying? 1, I can't do anything. 10, I can take an action that will be quite effective. So just jot down for yourself. I'm not going to ask you to share this with anybody else. I just want you to jot down for yourself where you are with that number. And then we're just going to push it to the side for now. Okay. Here's your first reactions. Let's go. So let me talk about the power of you. One of the things we know about people in organizations, and one of the things I believe, is that they know what's going on. Employees know what is happening in the institution. They know about the kinds of relationships that go on. They know about, in this case, bullying. So employees know. So at that level alone, because you're members of this institution, you have knowledge and experience. And what how I like to refer to you is you're the subject matter experts on your institution. You know your institution. The stuff that I'm going to share with you and present to you as things for you to consider are things that you craft and use within the context of what you understand. So, because someone coming in from outside will never know the institution the way that you do. The other thing we know, and the research is very, very, very strong, is that relationships with coworkers is critical in defining the quality of the work environment. A colleague of mine, Jane Dutton, who's at the University of Michigan, wrote a book in 2003 called Energizing Your Workplace. And Jane's a organizational psychologist with the Stephen F. Ross Business School. And one of the things that Jane talks about is this notion of high quality work connections. And they're characterized by things like respectful engagement, enabling people to do the job that they need to get done, a trusting engagement, and they're the kinds of things that support you, that energize you, that buffer you, and in some cases will protect you. Now, when you think about the people you work with, do each of you have at least one person where you would describe the relationship that you have with them as a high quality connection? Yeah? What's it like when you see that person? What's it like when they come into the room? Nice. Enjoyable? Come on, think of that person. You all said you had somebody, or more than one somebody. Go ahead, just
Calming.
calming.
I'd say energetic.
Energetic.
Self-affirming.
Self-affirming. You feel good when they show up, right? And even if the situation is tough, having them come in and knowing the relationship you have with them, you feel like things are more workable now, right? So that's important. Now, we all probably, and that's why we're here, have experiences that are the other side of that. And that's what Jane refers to as the corrosive connections, which I think is a very vivid descriptor. These are the connections and relationships that you have at work that undermine, that demean, that diminish, that dismiss. And using Stud Terkel's words from Working, it's violence to the spirit. These kinds of relationships with people are draining and demotivating, and any other D words you can possibly think about. So, and workplace bullying falls under that. So we know that the relationships we have with other people make a difference. We also know that work can only be done and only be accomplished with others. And I've had conversations with my faculty colleagues who will say to me, you know, I'm autonomous and I can do what I do because of who I am and what I am. I'm autonomous, I get to do whatever I want to do. And one of the things I point out to them is, what if the staff decided, and usually when I get to the third what if, they say, okay, I get your point. In order for me to be autonomous, I'm actually interdependent. I actually rely on and count on other people to do it. So that's very true about organizations regardless, is we are interdependent. Employees are interdependent. We need each other in order to do our job. So that's what's really important. Let me just tell you a little bit more about what we know about you. The work skills literature is very clear. Coworker support is a phenomenal source of comfort and buffering for difficult situations. The relationships we have will protect us in many cases and buffer us. Even in abusive supervisory situations, coworkers can be extremely powerful. What we know, though, in terms of hostility in organizations, of which workplace bullying is one example, is that we know that you see stuff. The research that we have indicates that 30 to 50% of people in organizations say that they have seen or are aware of workplace bullying kinds of situations. So we know that you see things. We also know that when people are targeted, one of the first things they will do is talk to you. It's one of the first things they'll do. They'll talk to their coworkers. So again, theme here, coworkers, important, getting information, you're important. The downside is, we know that when bullying becomes what we call mobbing, where multiple people go after somebody, that sometimes peers join in. So sometimes coworkers can flip and move into the dark side. Okay, so we want to watch out for that. But we also see some amazing stories of the creativity that coworkers have to protect each other in the face of these kinds of persistent forms of hostility. The example comes out of the healthcare literature and is shown up in lots of different ways. And sometimes it's called code white and sometimes it's called code pink. And this came from nurses who were attempting to address abusive situations with physicians who would verbally abuse a nurse, often publicly. And one of the strategies they used was to create a code white or a code pink. And the idea was that if any one of them saw a physician mistreating a nurse in a public setting, they would then go to a PA system, call out code white, if that's what they called it, or code pink, and the location. And then any nurse who could leave their station and would show up at the location and would surround the two people in the observer position and simply watch. They didn't step in, they didn't confront, they didn't do any, they watched. And what they found is that there was a dramatic drop in a number of these kinds of behaviors. Now, part of what we might worry about is they might go private, and then we're going to have to deal with other kinds of issues. But part of it was that the actors started to realize that we made them aware of what they were doing. And by being vigilant and being there, they stopped doing what they're doing. That came from coworkers. That came from a group of workers saying, we don't like this, we need to protect ourselves. And how can we do it in a way that's not risky to us? Because they didn't leave their stations if they couldn't, right? They never abandoned the station. There was always somebody there. They didn't get right into the middle of it where a physician or something could start to accuse them about interfering with me doing my job. They were present. That's creative. How about the gatekeeper? Anybody have a gatekeeper? Gatekeepers often are clerical staff to the director or to somebody else. And when you come in the morning, you go to the gatekeeper and you say, how is he or she today? And they say, if you don't have to deal with him or her, I would suggest you do other things. Right? So that person is attempting to manage the nature of the often opportunity for an interaction. Again, a very creative response. Now, one of the things that strikes me is this is a lot of creative energy on your part to manage a couple of people's behaviors, which is energy that can also be invested elsewhere. But I appreciate the creativity. And then the other part in terms of talking about how important you are is how the connection is to culture change and identifying the kind of culture and climate that exists in the institution and how we go about changing the conversations that we have with each other, because culture and climate, certainly leadership plays a role in that. We as members of an organization enact, challenge, reinforce, bring it forward. So we have opportunities to engage in conversations. So the bottom line is, you guys are important. You're very important. And you will make a difference in these situations. And that's what we're going to focus the rest of today on. So you know you're important, right? Okay, let's start. I want you all to put your hand on your heart, and I want you to repeat after me. I am important.
I am important
In this organization.
in this organization.
What I do,
What I do,
what I say,
What
what
I
I
say
say
has an impact on what will happen here.
has
has an impact on what will happen here.
All right, very well. All right, are we feeling refreshed? Let's go. So what we want to do is move you from being a bystander to being an upstander. And my bet is, as we move along, we're going to get opportunities for you guys to share in small groups and with each other some of your experiences. And my bet is a lot of you are already standing up. You may not be doing it in what you think are the huge grand gestures that you think have to happen, but you're standing up and you're doing things, and those are making a difference. So this is where we're going to go. So the first question we have to answer is to help or not to help. So what I want you to do is buddy up with somebody, and what you're going to do is share with each other a situation briefly when you helped somebody in one of these difficult kind of relationships, and why you helped them. So what you did and why, and then a situation where you felt you didn't help and why. Okay? So buddy up with someone and let's have you guys have a conversation with each other. What we'll do then is just report out not specifics, but just examples about why.
I think sometimes it's always about how they go. I think people
Doesn't that make you feel more peaceful? All right, so let's talk about what you learned about reasons. Okay. About reasons why people chose to help. So let's just toss them out. What were some of the reasons people had for helping?
You want to show support?
Showing support to somebody, showing connection with them, and that actually can be very powerful for people. Knowing that somebody saw something and wants to connect with them. Okay, others?
Fear for someone's safety.
Safety, you're concerned for their safety, so you help them because you want them to be safe. And in that helping, you're actually making a statement about your commitment to safety. Yes, back there and then over here.
I think whatever we say, the bottom line is you just care about them.
Yeah, you just care about it. It does show that, doesn't it? Just acknowledging it communicates to people that this is important. I'm probably going to faceplant, so the bystanders are going to have to work on this. All right.
Bringing truth to a situation.
Bringing truth to a situation. Say a little bit more about that.
Making known that whatever the action was is wrong, and
Mhm.
that this is the correct thing that happened,
Okay.
or this is the correct view of the situation,
Mm-hmm.
and thereby helping somebody not be bullied or.
Right.
Am I making myself clear?
Yeah, I mean, speaking truth about the situation also makes me think about one of the things we know is that you as observers are perceived as more credible by other people than if a target brings something to somebody's attention.
That's what I wanted to say.
Hey, see? Psychically connected, that's what we are. Good, other reasons that people talked about, yeah.
Not wanting something to keep going into the future, trying to stop it now as opposed to allowing it to perpetuate.
Right, so you can predict that if something doesn't happen at this point in time, it could continue and potentially it could become worse. Okay, other people, other reasons you chose to help.
Empowerment.
Empowerment, say a little bit more.
Empowering employees at all levels to contribute to, constructive conversation or.
So empowering, you were actually modeling behavior then, were you?
Or making each employee feel like their voice is heard and is a contribution, a
Okay.
critical contribution.
So your move to help them was also to affirm to them that their experience and their voice is important.
Correct.
Okay. How about other people? Other reasons? Is that about it? Does that capture it for everybody? Is that why you all helped? Okay, let's talk about when you didn't. What were the reasons for you about when you did not help in a situation? You're not a bad person, by the way. There are influences on us over which we don't have a lot of control. Over there and then there.
Fear of retaliation.
Fear of retaliation. Will I be the next person? Will this person come after me, the one who's engaging in these kinds of behaviors? Yeah.
Two things. Number one, it was a complete surprise that the person that I thought I knew and respected would do this.
Right.
And the second thing was, what exactly do I do? Because it was a public forum.
Yeah.
And it was, it wasn't a work situation.
Okay.
But it still was, in my estimation, quite bad.
Mhm.
And as a result, I don't engage with that person at all anymore, so.
Which is one of the costs, right? So first of all is being surprised that somebody had done something. That really does tend to catch us off guard, right? Because we're not anticipating anything like that. So we're kind of frozen in that moment. And then the other part is not being sure within that context, what am I going to do? There's a lot of people around. What might be the strategy I could use? So that whole concern about what options do I have and what are the risks of the options. How about other people, other reasons that you didn't help?
Perhaps a supervisor was present in the room and they have higher authority and they chose not to do anything.
Right. Okay, so somebody else whose job it is to do something is present. So I'm not sure it's my job or do I have legitimacy to do this? But somebody else does have legitimacy to do it. They're not doing it. And so sometimes also part of our experience in that moment is if they're not doing it, then maybe it's not really what it is.
They're condoning it, sort of.
In a way. And there's a phrase we like to use, what you permit, you promote. So there are moments like, I know there's all these little catchphrases and t-shirts. Yes?
What I was going to say is that I deal with a lead administrator that's been around for a long time. I've been around for 8 years. She's been around a lot longer. She knows how to work the system. And her knowledge of that is superior to mine in terms of experience. And so there are certain situations I don't stand up for because I know the retaliation, like the other lady said, will work out over time. Sure. She has experience.
So you've got the risks, and she's a particularly powerful one, and she knows how to work a system. So some of the options we may want to explore are ways to potentially engage other people and how you might be able to connect into that. But that's a wise assessment. The question we have to think about is, does that prevent you from doing any kind of action?
Right, yep.
Or are there other possibilities that we might be able to open up a little bit you never thought about? Because sometimes when we think about taking actions, we think about the grand gesture. That what I'm going to do is going to stop this. And sometimes what you do does exactly that. But by far the majority of the stuff, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be slight changes. It's going to be altering a situation, and we'll get into that because it's just kind of exciting. Okay, other reasons people chose not to.
Powerlessness.
Powerlessness, say a little bit more.
Certain people are around longer than you, and the powers that be, it's kind of like, well, this is the way it's been, so kind of put up with it. So you think, what the heck?
Right.
Nothing's going to change, and
Yep. And that's another reason that a lot of people give is any action I take will be ineffective, and the organization is unlikely to respond.
perfect.
See? Psychic. Yes.
So I think fear of retaliation is a good one. I think for me, it's also more of a general fear of, because not just that something's going to come back to me, but what if something happens and I lose my job or something happens, and so there's the whole life bit in addition to just worrying about what this person might do to me.
True.
In the moment.
So I'm in this situation, and what I do not only have to think about what the impact is going to be for this person, but what the impact is for me in this situation, what the impact is broadly speaking. How much risk am I engaging in, and what is the risk to me if I engage in this behavior? And my hope is, as we work together through the next couple of hours, is you'll find options in the specific situations that you're aware of that don't have those high cost risks, yet still can have an influence. And part of it is us figuring out what our goals are. Sometimes our goals are just to stop the target being hurt in that moment. Sometimes our goals are to really work with changing the nature of the culture, which means a whole other set of options, but part of it is figuring out our goal in that moment. Yes?
I think also a common theme is we've probably always heard, all of us have heard, that's just how he or she is. And it's almost as if the behavior's already been excused because that's just how they are.
Yeah. I hear that actually a lot. And my conversation with another dean from another institution, he and I have had lovely conversations. He's my former chair. Hi, Matt. And He and I have had conversations about this, and I remember early on when we were talking about a number of different things, one of the things he said is, he says, Lorelei, smart people are abrasive. And I said, okay, so what are you telling me? And he said, well, you just have to tolerate some of the abrasiveness. As long as it's not abusive, you have to tolerate it. And I looked at him and I said, I don't know that that's 100% connection. I don't think that's a perfect correlation. I know a lot of, quote, smart people. He was talking about faculty. Not that our staff aren't smart, but they are. But he was talking about faculty. I know a lot of smart people who are not abrasive. Anybody else?
Yes.
I know a lot of smart people are abrasive. So I think there's sometimes the beliefs we have that actually enable people, that enable them to continue. And we'll talk some more about that risk, but I think that was a good thing to flag. With managers sometimes, with managing conflict, which is a different kind of creature than workplace bullying, is they will often talk about, well, you two, it's just your personalities. You know, you have different personalities, and so you're going to have to adapt. Now, sometimes that's true, usually not in a bullying situation, but what argument does that allow a manager to do if they make that attribution? If it's just that you two need to figure this out because it's your style stuff, what's the advantage to a manager and administrator?
You're responsible.
They don't have to do
Basically, I
anything.
don't have to do anything because it belongs between the two of you. So we want to watch out for that kind of analogy, but yeah. Anybody else? Yeah?
You know,
And then
I'm
I'll do it.
gonna say one more specific one, and I think this is important, that's the only reason I throw it out. I think when somebody from a department goes to ombuds and
Mhm.
talks and then comes back, they're actually telling other people, the coworkers, the effectiveness of that. So I went to ombuds, I had a great time with the individual I spoke to, no, it
Right.
was really helpful, but I was discouraged by the fact at the end that they said, well, I can't actually do anything about that except report to the dean.
Mhm.
And so I think ombuds is great, and I probably missed this, but a sheet that says, here are some other things you can do,
Mhm.
so that the report we bring back to the department says, well, they can't actually
Mhm.
get directly involved, but here's 10 things we can do.
Right.
Because I don't want to discourage the other coworkers saying, oh, you know, ombuds couldn't do anything, and then they roll their eyes.
Right.
Because
that's
it's a
more-
great group.
That's more broadly a comment. There's two responses. One is you got ombuds here, so I
Yeah.
encourage you in the break to have a chat with them
Okay.
because I think they have some interesting ideas about that.
Yeah.
The second part is I think that ties into a much more broader comment that somebody else made, which is that you're not sure what units are going to be able to do. They may have it in units best positioned, or you think are best positioned to do it, and they feel their hands are tied. And we'll actually get to that, talking about why peer action is probably a more immediate and a more powerful thing in a moment than going formally. Doesn't mean don't go formally in some situations, but because policies and procedures not only define, but they also restrict action. And so some of the frustrations, for example, for HR people, for people in BUDS offices and other kinds of offices that are designated to do these kinds of things, is there almost seems to be kind of a line. And if somebody's dancing along the line, not over it, they're dancing along the line, then formally, people in these units often feel restricted. But they do talk about informally things that they can do.
I was gonna say that you've tried to do something in the past,
Mhm.
and either there was, nothing happened, or there was a negative impact as a result.
Right. So it's a feeling of helplessness. It's not going to work. So why try, particularly if the last time I did it, it got worse. And I don't want to make it, at the very least, I don't want to make it worse, right? Yeah, and I'll come over here, sorry.
It can also work out in an opposite effect where you can take action in an informal way. However, the bullier can take it on as it being retaliation against them, which
Yeah.
I have a lot of experience with.
Okay, so what you're saying is you can take action, and the person with whom you're taking action against, even though you're not taking it against them, you might be helping the target or something like, reframes that as, see, she's targeting me.
Right.
Yeah, and that, we'll talk about the importance of documenting things, and I'm not just for yourself, but also for identifying the impacts and the patterns on behavior. And that's where units come into play because of how they do an investigation in situations like that and how they gather their information. But you're right. So for you, if you're having that experience, then certain actions have a greater risk value than others. So then we want to look for other kinds of actions for you that don't put you at that kind of risk, yet still can allow you to have influence in that context. And also you're telling us that at some point you're also a target. Bystanders, beware. Other people, other reasons. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm standing so close to you that I don't get to, I'm
The
sorry.
one thing that came to mind is not feeling supported.
Okay, by, more broadly by the unit or?
Maybe by the unit and all that stuff, like if you kind of not retaliate, but if you
Try to challenge.
try to challenge something
Mhm.
that you feel is not correct. and
Right.
Not feeling getting the support you need, something along those lines.
So what she's talking about is when you go to take an action or you feel like you want to challenge something, but then everybody else or the unit just stays silent. So you're left out there and not supported in your action. Has anybody ever had that experience where you worked together and you said, okay, this is what we want to do, right? This is how we're going to approach this situation, and usually one of you gets to be the spokesperson, right? So maybe it happens in a meeting, you're all ready, you've gone through your scenario, you've practiced your script, and you go out there and you say something, and the person's response or what's happening in the meeting says, that's your opinion, what about everybody else? And nobody else says anything. Right? So those are things we have to think through when we take those kinds of actions. So the action that you wanted to take in that situation, maybe we need to look for a different one, so that you're not going to have to rely on getting support from them to do that. Others? We got lots of reasons not to do stuff, right? So obviously, but they all make sense. And what it says to me is that you guys are very thoughtful about when you take action, and you're very thoughtful about what it's going to be and whether you can take action. So part of what we want to be able to do here is to create more opportunities for you to see action possibilities, recognizing risk, recognizing purpose, and also recognizing that you are not alone. Okay, so let's get into it. One of the things with, there's a very extensive literature on when people choose not to get involved and when they choose to get involved. And the classic articles on that are written by two gentlemen, Latané and Darley, talking about bystander action. And based on years of their own research, but also it's been rejuvenated or revitalized in the last several years, has been a recognition that when people are making choices, they're actually making 5 decisions. 5. The first decision that people are making is this a problematic behavior? Right? So when you felt surprised, for example, when something happened, part of that is like, and maybe the behaviors don't look in that moment, but you're sort of wondering about it. So if we're not sure if that's a negative behavior or hostile behavior, that will often stop any action we take for the time being. Often we'll go into some kind of data collection mode. Oh, sorry, didn't show. Is it egregious enough? So I've decided this is problematic. How big a problem is it? Sorry about that. Is it immediate? Oh, and by the way, you guys, the folks at the back, you guys have their email addresses, everybody who signed up? Yeah? I did. Okay, great, Lori, thanks. Because what I'll do is I'll send everybody the PowerPoint. I also have a list of resources and references, not just literature, but also policies, procedures, materials that I think will be helpful. So, so is it egregious enough? Are people being harmed by this? Now let me ask you this. We're going to talk in more detail about what workplace bullying is, but based on the fact that you're all here, you obviously each have an idea about workplace bullying, right? All right? So let me ask you as subject matter experts. Does workplace bullying hurt? Okay, just want to check. All right. Once people make that decision that there's a bad behavior and it's a harmful behavior, then they have to figure out, is it my responsibility to confront? Is it my and I use confront just meaning deal with. So is it my responsibility to engage? People need to make those decisions, and we'll talk about some of the things that go into people's decision making and have you work with some of that within specific kinds of scenarios. If they decide, yes, I do have a responsibility to do something, then the next question is, but what is it that I'm going to do? And that was part of what your conversation's about. We're thinking about some of the actions you were taking and why you took what you did and why you chose not to take other ones because of risk, because of purpose, because of available action. And then once you decide what you want to do, then you gotta do it. And sometimes we're at this point of saying, okay, I want to take that action, I'm just not exactly sure how to make it happen. And so we want to be able to hopefully get to that point to talk about and work within scenarios about how to make things happen. And my bet is with the talented and available in this room, and as we share the experiences that people are having, both working with a scenario but also their own experiences, you will find lots of examples about how to do things and to do things that will have an impact. Okay, so we're going to go through this decision by decision, all right? We're going to work with it decision by decision. So the very first decision, and by the way, all 5 of these decisions are usually made like that, very, very quickly. So we're going to slow it down. And so the first decision you're making is this a negative behavior? Is this a hostile behavior? Is this a problematic behavior? So what I want to do, I just want to show you some of the ways we talk about this stuff. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a video clip, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And I want you to talk about what you see. These are all the wonderful things that we could do. Anybody know where that tagline comes from? Or a version of it? Oh, the things we do? How about, the places we go? Dr. Seuss, right. One of the great sages of our time. These are all the ranges of concepts that we use in the literature to describe what we're talking about today. And they're all about persistent forms of hostility, the ways that we go after each other and do things. So, I'm going to show you a scenario. Oh, and I wanted to let Tom know, we had a video glitch yesterday, and I was trying to straighten it out last night, and I went, oh my goodness, it's not working. And then I found my video on YouTube. Yay! Let me just go back for a minute. Okay, we're going to put up a scenario, and what I want you to do is to be thinking about the behaviors that you see, and noting down the kinds of behaviors you see, and overall how you're feeling as you watch this happen.
My name's Jennifer. I've been with this office for 11 years now. I like the people that are here. I like that this job requires a lot of attention to detail, and I take my job very seriously.
My name is Lorraine. I've actually just started here maybe about 8 months ago, and I love this place. It's great. My boss is amazing. She's the one that promoted me, so you know what? I just love the lady.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Michelle.
Do you have that budget report that I need for the meeting this
Yes, I
afternoon?
do. It's right here.
And then I work with Jennifer, who I'm having just a blast with. See, she's such an easy person to kid around with, so I quite enjoy, you know, playing jokes on her.
It was right here.
It was.
I hope you know how important this is for the meeting.
Maybe I'll help look for it so you can...
There was an incident where I was looking for a very important file, and she found it.
I think these are them.
But I suspect that she misplaced it on purpose.
Good. It looks like it's all here. Well, thanks. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
I can't believe you lost the file.
I'm Michelle. I'm the manager of this department, and I have a number of support staff who work directly for me. I've got Jennifer, who's been with me about 11 years. She's efficient. She's very, very on the ball when it comes to getting her work done. Meticulous, attention to detail. Problem is, lately she's been very distracted, rather disorganized, and I'm not sure what's going on.
Since Lorraine has joined our team, I feel that things have changed. To people, she appears to be very nice and sincere, but to me, she just seems to want to sabotage my work.
What you doing? When I point out her mistakes, I just love seeing her reaction. Well, but I wasn't wrong. I was in the right. I corrected her, and, you know, and she just sat there, didn't say a thing.
I find her intimidating, and it's just very difficult to work with her. She's been undermining my work. She sends emails to my coworkers attacking my character.
Everything is perfect when it comes to her. And you know what? she's not. And when I pointed out that fact, well, you know, I'm sorry, so she got her nose a little out of joint. But at the very end, I look better, and that's the important thing. You should have seen what I did to Jennifer yesterday. I got into her files and
I actually heard her on the phone, and she admitted to the person she was talking to that she messed up my files. And she was laughing about it.
Look on her face when I walked around the corner and
I was shocked initially, and I was very hurt. I could not believe that Lorraine would do that.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Michelle. May I talk to you for a couple of minutes?
Sure, come on in.
It's about Lorraine.
What's up? There's a bit of dissension between the two of them, but I think it's a test of character to see which of them is going to handle it the best. They're just going to have to work it out between the two of them and see how they manage that.
Okay. I'm at my wit's end. I don't know what to do now. Because if I can't go to my boss, then what do I do?
Harassment in the workplace is not acceptable.
Wow, right? That one always makes me sad. Okay, so what did you see? What kinds of behaviors did you see?
Passive aggressive.
What's an example of passive aggressive?
Where she acted like she didn't know that the file was hidden, but she went right to the file and found it. So it wasn't really overt that she hid it, but
not overt, and actually that's not unusual for a bullying relationship to start off where the behaviors are quite covert and subtle, which therefore makes it a little harder to articulate what's happening. How about other people? What other things did you see? Yeah.
Lack of internet, IT security.
Lack of IT security.
Well, it is. I mean, we're going to put in all our stuff on computers. If you want to print it, you go and print it yourself. But to the point, the fact that Lorraine is sitting behind Jennifer. So, you know, I was thinking that Lorraine was going to flick her off one time or something because. So I think they should be separated. There should be a cubicle separating where only the supervisor can look at them and they can work by themselves.
So you could see that as a potential solution to managing that behavior?
Separating them so that Lorraine doesn't see what mistakes Jennifer is making and going up there and pointing them out, because I do know people like that.
Okay. Okay, so one of the behaviors you saw was that she pointed out mistakes quite joyously. So there's that behavior, and we might be able to manage that behavior by making the screen more private. My question to you is, do you think Lorraine will stop there?
No, but that could be the point where you can start saying, I have this, why is this happening then?
Right.
I can't remember the supervisor's name.
So if actually is part of what you're saying is if we had a security, if there was a blockage there, then there wouldn't be any, if Jennifer told Lorraine and told the manager about someone pointing out her mistakes, Lorraine never should have been able to see the mistakes. Right. So that would have indicated something problematic. Okay. How about other people, other kinds of behaviors you saw?
The bully justified her behavior. I look better.
Yeah, that was kind of upfront, wasn't it? Giving you a sense of what, in this case, her motive was. And her motive was a status issue, a scarce resource. I got promoted, I want to continue to move up the chain. And there was other people, here and here and then back there. Yeah.
When the manager went to her boss, the boss basically blew her off.
Yeah.
I mean, no support. There was no connection emotionally, no acknowledgement that, gosh, do we have a problem here?
Right.
There was no guidance or any kind of, essentially she was dismissed. You work it out. And then, and on top of that, although I believe she was speaking in her own mind.
Right.
But for her to think, well, we'll see which one comes out on top, or whatever the phrases that she used, that may be the exact.
It's an example of character, strength of character.
Right.
See who
so
can rise
essentially,
above.
in her mind, she was pitting them against each other.
Which might be a commentary on the culture that's developed there. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the organizational risk factors, and one of them is a competitive culture, where there's scarce resources in some fashion or other, and people are pitted against each other in order to do that. So that's a situation where bullying becomes a strategy for achievement. You had
I was gonna say, first, it's manipulative, and then second of all, it's creating a sense of insecurity with that woman, and she's gonna constantly be thinking that this woman's out to get her and constantly going to her manager, so she's looking like the bad guy in the situation.
Right, that's a really good observation. I mean, you can see how it's starting to consume Jennifer's attention, right? And now she's becoming quite anxious and nervous about it. So her energy is not always being directed at the work, and she's someone who's very attentive to detail, right? Very focused, very on, and now she's becoming distracted. And if somebody isn't picking up on why an employee, and the manager's interesting, right? Says 11 years, great employee, does all these wonderful things. Last few months, seems distracted. And she gets presented with something and she's not even saying what the possibilities are. But a cost for someone on the receiving end of that is they do become increasingly distracted, and then sometimes they don't do their job as well. And if the organization or the administration isn't aware of or doesn't want to be aware of, now what they do is invoke progressive discipline.
Well, then you become consumed also with what that person's up to, and even if they aren't engaging in manipulative behavior, you assume that they constantly are.
Right. So it affects your ability to even work with them. Yeah, I mean, that is there's been some interesting research looking at, because bullying relationships often will last for a very long time, so we can all be shocked about that. But watching how people in a bullying relationship continue to work together, even though the relationship is toxic. And it's very interesting to see how people try to survive within that context. But in the long run, it doesn't work. Because people, do you have a hand up?
You know, she had a classic example, although the situation was shocking at the moment, to just make her presence known at the phone conversation and say, really?
Right.
I had the lead administrator I had to deal with rifling through my papers on my desk one time, and my initial response was to just walk away.
Right.
And then I just kind of grabbed myself by the throat, even though she's way high, and I just stood right behind her, and she turned around, and there I was, and she was shocked.
Yeah, and I mean, if it's early on, people will often be able to do that.
Yeah.
If they've been continually exposed to it over a period of time, they're less able to come up, they're less able to respond. So we do want to deal with this stuff early on, but that is an interesting example, and it's also an interesting example of what a bystander can do, because we saw a bystander in there too, didn't we? Who was the bystander?
On the phone.
Person on the phone, and there was another person there. Person on the computer showing her the message, right? So we already have some coworkers who are aware something's going on. Other people, other things that you saw, the behaviors that you saw. Yeah.
Well, it's a backstabbing, setting her up for failure. She's doing everything she can to make her look bad.
Right.
In ways that make it really hard to affect change or to stop her.
Right. Because a lot of what she's doing is very subtle, right? So it's hard to know that file could have been misplaced, right? What's interesting to me is, though, she's using email. And I'm always fascinated by email, because when you do things in email, and some people will just spell it all out for you in email, and I look at the email and go, you do know you put that in writing, right? You do know you put that in writing. So she's starting actually to escalate her behaviors, but that's also a place at which the actor might be starting to make mistakes. And if you're, Tom.
Go ahead, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's okay.
I just wanted to observe that I think the supervisor in that situation made a classic mistake in fielding the complaint. And the complaint actually was not just about a conflict, it was about conduct.
Conduct, yeah.
And then for the supervisor to flip that and call it conflict, you just have to work it out, I think is a really bad mistake.
And there's another phrase for you guys, conflict or conduct. And the issues of workplace bullying are about conduct issues. They're about how people treat and behave towards each other. And we'll talk a little bit more about the connection between conflict and bullying. But anything else about that you saw? Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking in terms of saying that the woman was making even more mistakes for the last few months, seeming distracted. Part of it might have been being sabotaged, and part of it might have been because of being, of course, so anxious, making more mistakes. But then also feeling making it harder to stand up for yourself because you feel like you've made legitimate mistakes, therefore perhaps you deserve this
Yeah,
kind of.
and there are these sort of reflective effects on a target over time, someone over time, is they start to doubt themselves, become less confident, which a lot of times undermines their ability to be able to respond in ways that might be able to at least push back a little bit. So you can see how costly that becomes, right? Now overall, what did somebody else? Yeah.
Well, I find it interesting. I mean, the situation also develops because of their natural personalities. The one chick, excuse me,
one individual
is, you know, the way that she starts off. She says, "I have a lot of fun with her," so it makes it seem like it's going to be a healthy kind of a relationship, poking fun and that. And then the woman who takes her job seriously.
Right.
It's not something that's easy for her to let go. So the combination of both of their natural personalities, it's a matter of managing those natural personalities, their authentic selves, so that
I think we got a response. Keep going.
So that the one woman know your limits, know your boundaries of what is appropriate behavior conduct.
Right. Okay, I have a response to that, but so did somebody else.
Well, I think you started to say it at the end that what is acceptable conduct.
Right.
That's not fun.
Right.
That's just inexcusable, rude,
but she's
unacceptable behavior.
Right.
And that's a common response. Oh, I was just having fun. I was just poking, I was just making a joke. But that's a common thing that bullies say, that rude people say, to get away with bad behavior.
There's a framing that can go on, and it's to somebody's advantage to frame it in that way. I will talk a little bit about who might be more vulnerable at times for both of these kinds of things. I have a real cautiousness about talking about personality, and my reason for that is because sometimes, and particularly organizations will often take this response that, just like this manager did, which is that this is an issue, this is an interpersonal issue. This is something between you two and something you two need to work out. The nature of bullying is such that it's not a one-shot deal. It's an ongoing deal. When something persists like that, it implicates the organization, because hostility should not be able to persist if the organization doesn't tolerate it. And there's some really good research literature out there, particularly on sexual harassment, that shows that even people who have a high proclivity to sexually harass will not do it in an organization that does not tolerate it. They'll do it other places, but they won't do it in that organization. So there's a real power in an institution. There's a real power amongst the coworkers to be able to manage that. And the question about conduct, and Tom's got his hand up. Go, Tom, go.
The other parallel with sexual harassment is when that's investigated, they don't look at what was the intent. They look at what was the impact.
Right, right. So, and we've had questions about, well, people who do this stuff, maybe they didn't mean to do it. And so one of our responses is to talk about, if you engage in a variety of behaviors repetitively, there is something that you're doing, and you do have a responsibility for it, regardless of whether you intended harm or not. You do have a responsibility for it. But it's interesting to see how our actor here framed things as, I like to have fun. And maybe that's true, maybe she likes to have fun, but you also heard later on her say, if, I have to get ahead. This is what I gotta do. So when you start hearing stuff like that, you're going, okay, there's something else going on here as well.
That's what I mean by
Yeah.
the boundaries and limits.
Yeah, the boundaries, setting limits. And the manager didn't do any of that. Didn't do any of that at all. And so the interesting part is the bystanders we have and what might have been their possibilities to do stuff with that. Well, let's just talk about that for a minute. We got a couple of bystanders. We got the person on the phone that's being talked to, and we have a coworker who has gotten an email. What kinds of ideas might you have had for them? For the person on the phone, what could they have done in that circumstance? The one that Lorraine is talking to and telling her about what she did to Jennifer. What kinds of options does that person have? What do you think? Yeah.
That was when she was talking about having hidden the file. Is that what she said? Okay.
And seeing the look
well,
on her face.
So I could think, my question might be, how did she respond when you told her that you had played that joke on her? Because she never told her that she had hidden the file, so there
Right.
was no, there was no way that that Lorraine, that was her name, right? The victim. There was no way that she would have
Jennifer's the victim,
Oh,
Lorraine's the actor,
Okay,
and
sorry.
Michelle is the, I get
Uh,
moved around
the
all
victim,
the time.
The victim didn't know that in any way that it could have been a practical joke, and it was obviously a very cruel practical joke, but it becomes a joke if the person is a part of it, and if they're like, oh my gosh, that was so funny, I can't believe you did that. It still may not have been appropriate, but at least they would have known the situation. And
So
so
what's-
as the listener, you could say, well, how does she respond? And then when the aggressor says, oh, well, I haven't told her, then you're like, then you have the opportunity to say more.
And that's an interesting approach too, because it's not a very risky one for you. Because you're doing it in a subtle way, and that's okay. Subtle's okay. You're doing it in a subtle way and creating an opportunity here. And if a person says, well, I didn't tell them, and then you can start talking to them about conduct. Well, that's not fair. That wasn't a nice thing to do. That kind of thing. How about other people? Other things that either on the phone or with the person who received the email, where Lorraine is saying to the person in the email the tricks and things that she's been playing on Jennifer.
Forward it to the boss.
You get forwarded to the boss. Anything else you can think of?
I'd like to think of like beyond of what's what's happening.
Okay.
I mean, the repercussions. One, the lady is her job starting to suffer.
Right.
Two, she's is getting upset and she has to look for a new job. Sure, she doesn't want to.
Right.
Or she could have a breaking point and something could happen.
Yeah, those are the possibilities, right?
Yeah.
And we need to think about that. I mean, when we start to see this kind of stuff happening as coworkers, as people who see it happening, sometimes it's really important to start projecting. What are the consequences of something not being done? What are the consequences to her? What are the consequences for me? What are the consequences for the organization? Okay. I don't suppose I have to ask how that made you feel. Like I said, that one always makes me feel sad. Okay, so we've actually been talking, gone through an example of workplace bullying. You guys have in your minds what workplace bullying is. Now what I'd like you to do is in the small groups that you are, I want you to talk together about what you see workplace bullying is, and in particular identifying what you think are the distinguishing characteristics that would, for example, distinguish it from a conflict. So talk together for about 3 to 4 minutes about what you see as the elements, what you understand workplace bullying to be, and in that conversation distill out of it what you see as some of the distinguishing elements, and then we'll talk about that together. Let's talk a little bit about what you think workplace bullying is. So what do you think it is? Okay.
Well, we have a lot of things.
But let's choose one so we can get lots of people to throw stuff out.
The one that kept coming up for us is a repetitive behavior that creates an energy where people don't want to come into work.
Right.
You don't want to be in that space.
Wow, that's in a nutshell what we got going on. Let me go back to the first part. It is repetitive. These are frequently occurring behaviors. So it's usually not just a one shot. They happen a lot. Okay? So repetitive is one of the key features. It's different than a one-off kind of aggressive activity. How about others? What other kinds of qualities or characteristics did you find or think about? Yeah.
I know that most people, it's just a lack of respect. Personally, I think it's a personal responsibility, a lack of respect for yourself. And I have seen it a lot in situations where there isn't an inclusiveness, where there isn't a team effort. And so people don't see that each person is an important part of the whole puzzle.
Okay.
And so you see that especially, I'm going to speak about academia because you have to publish or perish. So, people, and I can see in just opportunities I've had to be in different departments where there's departments where there's more inclusiveness because they work in a lab together. So each person seems to be able to see their value. And that's really powerful. And so when a person takes personal responsibility for their decision making about how they feel about themselves and how they interact with someone else, that's really the solution. But how do you get that experience?
Okay, you're taking us down the road. And that's ultimately where we want to go. So I'm gonna just take us, but no. I'm just gonna take us a little back up. And part of what I also, for me, heard you talking about there is some sense about standards by which we treat each other and how we talk together. And that workplace bullying for you violates those standards, whether that's about a standard of respect and how respect gets communicated, and a standard about accountability for one's behavior. Would that capture that piece?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Other kinds of issues. I mean, other elements that you saw. We've got repetitive, you got that it violates some standard about, or our understanding about respectful treatment and about accountability for behavior. What else?
Sabotage.
Sabotage is an example of it, sure. How about distinctive elements? And I want to make sure I don't lose you. Go ahead.
There seems to be a power element there.
Tell me about it.
Imposing, well, number one is not being straightforward about your intent, or disguising your intent in order to have an outcome where you see yourself coming out on top, as the woman did in the video.
Okay.
It tends to be often somebody who can recognize a victim. I mean, maybe that's being too blunt, but there are some
cases where that's exactly what's happening.
Right there, where sometimes people test the waters, and if there are no takers, they kind of move on. But sometimes they discover there is somebody who's vulnerable, and who can, in their vulnerability, move them forward, whether it's for professional purposes or personal purposes, and that can act out in bullying situations.
Okay, so there's a lot going on there. One is you talked about motive, potential motive, and sometimes that's always a challenge for us to figure out. It's important when we're doing an assessment to try to understand motive, because if somebody is trying to get something they need, there might be other ways we can get it for them besides them taking out other people. The notion about power. Did other people talk about power? Because I'll comment on that. But did you others of you talk about power at all when you talked about it? You had your hand up.
That's what I was going to say is motivation. There's always an underlying motive.
There's always an underlying motive, and part of it is for us to sometimes to try to understand. But there's also a time at which the behavior is bad right now. I don't care why you're doing it, it stops. Or we've got to do something to break this interaction right at this moment. And in a longer term perspective, that's probably what we're going to need to do to understand the person's motive and need so we can figure out another way to do it. Other things around power. Did anybody else talk about power? Yeah.
We talked about power in the sense that a supervisor would give you the silent treatment as a way to kind of squash you.
Right.
It's very passive aggressive. They don't have to be a bully. They just
They
are
don't have to be
absent.
overt.
They don't have to be overt.
And how do you tell them about the silent treatment?
I think the other side of that is it's intended to lower self-esteem in the target.
Again, we're getting at actor intent, and some are very thoughtful in their intent, others are not necessarily so thoughtful in their intent. Yeah.
Well, that was one thing we brought up too, is sometimes trying to get what you want, whenever you want it. I want what I want when I want it, and I
Right.
got it yesterday.
Right. So very much going after what you want, and somebody might just be in your way. There's what we call instrumental aggression, which is the use of aggressive behavior in order to get a gain. And you might be aggressive towards somebody, but that's not your intention to harm them. You just want them out of the way so you can get what you want. So you can get the promotion. So you can get that kind of. Let me go back to power for a sec. What's very characteristic of bullying types of situations is there usually is a power imbalance. And that can be formally. The popular literature says that it's supervisors who do this to subordinates, and we certainly have data that that's true. We also have a lot of data that talks about it happening laterally, that coworkers do it to each other. And we also have data about subordinates doing it to supervisors, which for supervisors is very challenging because they can't convince anybody else that they're being bullied or being mistreated by a subordinate, because other people are going, excuse me, you're the supervisor, you can't be bullied by them, right? Or the power imbalance is an informal one. People can be in very powerful positions relative to you if they have information that you need in order to get what you need to get done, right? So withholding information then can become a very powerful way to influence somebody. The other thing is, with these kinds of behaviors, we talked about it being subtle and but then it starts to move. The process of bullying is if it's not engaged with and managed much earlier on, it will tend to escalate. Behaviors will become more direct. The effects will become magnified. the target becomes less and less able to manage the situation. There's spillover all over the place, so that now you have somebody who doesn't even have the ability to defend themselves. So our power in a relationship has a direct influence on our ability to be able to counter what's happening, to be able to balance it off. And that's one of the characteristics we use to distinguish between a conflict, between equals, because these are people who can give as good as they get, and a bullying situation. Now, if you've ever seen an escalated conflict where you've got two heavy-duty actors going at it with each other, you know that's still an ugly situation, and you know that everybody starts behaving badly, and it's just awful for everybody else. And that is a hard situation, and we do deal with those things. Bullying situation, you have somebody being disempowered. So the power balance has shifted. So that's a really critical part. Now, we had some other hands up.
I was just going to say, going along with that, a disproportionate response. So there's a power balance, but there's also, even if it's trying to instigate something inaccurately or a reaction to something over, like with the doctor example, you know,
Right.
getting, maybe the nurse misplaced the file, but that doesn't mean that.
Okay. So that the actor's behavior is actually perceived as violating, again, another sort of code of conduct, perhaps in terms of what is matching to the seriousness of, quote, the offense, right? And Ken Westhuse, for example, is a really interesting fellow who does a lot of work in what he calls academic mobbing. And in particular, he's interested in where professors get targeted by other professors and administration to attempt to move them out of an organization. And one of the analyses he comes up with is that the response to the target's behavior, because often the target has engaged in some behavior that can be challenging, it's out of proportion to what's happened. And so you've gone beyond. But that's also another interesting piece, because the question is what bullying is not. It is not the delivery of legitimate constructive criticism about job performance. That's not bullying. It's not the appropriate implementation of academic freedom and the ability to pursue inquiry in our research and our teaching. Those things are not bullying situations. There is a distinction between an assertive management style and an abusive management style. There's a really great book called Brutal, I'm going to spit in my mouth, Brutal Bosses and Their Prey. And he makes the distinction between fair and firm supervision and brutal or abusive supervision. So we like to it's important we make those kinds of distinctions. Because sometimes, Joel and I will talk about this, that when we talk with people about their experiences in workplaces, sometimes what they're talking about is we have somebody who is upset because they've been disciplined. But they've been disciplined appropriately. Progressive discipline, appropriate warning, appropriate feedback, opportunities to correct. That is not a bullying situation. And we find that's really important, particularly when we're talking to supervisors, because they're very sensitive about this. Because sometimes what they're told is when they go to do progressive discipline, you're bullying me. And they're like, okay, now what am I going to do with this? Anything else about what you think about when you think about bullying and you discussed in your context? Because you guys are defining all the elements. You're really good at this. I knew you would be, unfortunately. I knew you would be. Anything else? Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to kind of touch back on that end goal or objective was something that kind of came up here, and I know that you had spoken a little bit about that in terms of an end goal of rising to the top, and that there's kind of other ways that we can get you there, but sometimes that end goal is just this person being gone.
Yeah. Well, and that's where the institutional structures and the people who are in the position and are empowered by the institutional structures have to step in and stop and say you can't do this. One of the have you ever heard of something called idiosyncrasy credits? I love this concept. And what this concept is about is that some people in organizations are given idiosyncrasy credits because of what they do in the organization, what they offer to the organization. In an academic setting, for example, you might have an incredibly productive academic researcher, right? Bring in big grants, employs a lot of people. And that person may engage in the kinds of behaviors that we're talking about, the kinds of relationships we're talking about. And it creates an interesting dilemma for the organization, because you have somebody who is a high producer, who is important to the organization, brings reputation, provides employment, brings recognition, and they're also behaving in a hostile and abusive and bullying fashion. What do we do? And so we call it giving somebody idiosyncrasy credits. You will often get, maybe what we'll do is try to protect the target by moving them out of the situation, but we don't deal with the actor on it. We allow certain people to be allowed to continue in that because they're valuable people to the organization. And one of the approaches or responses we have to that, and we work with people like that, it's really interesting to talk to folks in healthcare about sometimes some physician-related kinds of issues where you have someone who is a very, very, very talented physician, very talented. And and in a particular situation, they treat their staff abusively. They throw things, they do a whole lot of other stuff. And the system knows that that's not appropriate. Actually, they even have a name for it. It's called disruptive practitioner behavior. And they have to have policies and procedures on it because of being accredited. But they don't want to do anything that could potentially have that person leave because of who that person is. The arguments that we make to them is, you need to consider impact. So you're looking at it in terms of reputation. Okay, that's one indicator. But what about turnover? What about how long do the staff stay in that unit? Because we know when we lose staff, we have to bring in new people and we have to train them. And from an organizational perspective, that's an investment. That's a huge investment. If you have staff who are being exposed to this, a number of things that you've talked about, and it's not just targets, the effects also affect you. The data is very strong that you show similar kinds of effects if you're exposed, if you know what's happening in your organization and you're exposed to it. Are you going to be 100% on task on the job? No. So the risk for the organization is a productivity one. We did work with the Veterans Administration, and we were able to document for them, showing them how employees' experiences of abusive treatment, either with their supervisors or from each other, was directly linked to their job satisfaction, which was directly linked to patient satisfaction. And what we pointed out, by doing that, what we pointed out to them is, if you care about patient satisfaction, and we are also able to demonstrate a connection to patient quality of care delivery, if you value that, then you want your employees to be satisfied, right? Because that's a direct connector. And one of the things that will influence their satisfaction is what goes on amongst them and with their supervisors. So if you can improve and enhance that relationship, you will ultimately improve the outcomes that matter to you. So what we do with people is we document the business case on the idiosyncrasies, just how costly it is. We broaden the definition of cost, and then we show them how costly it is if you allow this person to continue to do what you're doing. So that's a power of idiosyncrasy credits. What we also try to encourage people to do is to disconnect this. So yes, that person is important on these dimensions, but let's look at those other dimensions and what they're costing everybody in the organization. One of a high-profile case of a pharmaceutical firm, which I can't remember the name at this time, a number of years ago, they brought in a CEO who turned the organization around like that. Their stock prices had dropped dramatically, and within a matter of 2 years had tripled under his leadership. Success, right? The other thing that was happening was numbers of sexual harassment suits being launched against him by a number of the women in the organization. And what the board was doing was paying them off. $1 million here, $1 million there, $1 million there. And they were doing this over several years until someone on the board said, you know what? This is just way too expensive. Because now things were being taken outside the organization, legal action. So it took them a while to figure that out. We wanted to figure that out early on. That's where you come in to be able to start responding in the moment early on before folks are allowed to get a hold of this stuff. Yeah.
I have a question, which is, how does tenure fit into all of this?
Well, in yesterday's session we were talking about strategies, and somebody said, how about abolishing tenure? And I'm going, okay, let me take a deep breath and let me just, okay. How does tenure fit into all of it? A couple of interesting ways to think about it. One way is, what we know about workplace bullying is that the longer people are in relationships with each other, the more opportunity there is for aggressive and bullying behaviors. Not inherent in it, but the more opportunity there is. When faculty are tenured, they're here for a long time and they're here with each other for a long time. So the rates that we have found in universities is about 1/3 of faculty indicate that they have been in bullying relationships. And guess who they say bullies them? Who do you think bullies faculty? Peers? Peers. It's not chairs. That's what I tell my faculty, it's not me. It's not administrators, it's peers. They get it from each other. Now, but staff in universities, who do you think is more likely to be, they're more likely to identify as someone who bullies them? Supervisors, co-workers, subordinates, what we got? Who do you think it is for staff? Supervisors. It's more likely to be supervisors. There will come stuff from their co-workers, but more from them. So we have that kind of difference. The other part about another response with respect to tenure is, I know there are lots of tenured faculty who do not behave this way at all. So it is not inherent in the nature of tenure for that to happen. Often when people raise it, part of what the assessment is if you have people who can never be threatened to lose their job, that maybe they will engage in a lot of really nasty, terrible, disgusting things. Actually, every university does have mechanisms available to start processes on tenured faculty. And it is in very specific situations, very specific kinds of things, but abusive and abrasive, if it's abusive conduct, that's one of the ones that's more likely for it to happen. But they do it primarily to each other, which for some of you are thinking, phew, that's fine. But actually, if they're doing it to each other, it's still affecting your life in the department, because you're going to be affected by that, right? We get a nod, we're going to be affected by it. Okay. So, I'm looking at my watch. Okay. Actually, you know what? We just covered a ton of material on slides. Don't you love it when we can work with the knowledge and experience you guys have? So what I want to do is I want to take us forward. Wait, let me ask you one question. Would you like a little break right now, or you want to keep rolling?
A break, please.
You want 5 minutes? Go for it. Okay, everybody, let's go back.
Let's see if I can get
Okay, for those of you who know what 5 minutes was, you get to benefit from this. Okay. So what we've been talking about up to this point is workplace bullying a bad idea? What do you think? Yes. And we have some ideas about what it looks like, right? It's repetitive behavior, it's persistent, it's enduring. That's another one of its qualities, is that it goes on for a very long time. It can go on for a long time. And that's what makes it really powerful, because it tends to continue at somebody on an ongoing basis. So just looking at the individual behaviors, you may not think it a big deal. What you have to look at is how they co-occur, and that they are co-occurring over a period of time. So it essentially wears away at somebody over time. Power imbalance is often involved, whether that's formally or informally, and somebody's not able to defend themselves. And often when we talk to people about it, they will talk about things like there are appropriate ways to behave, there is appropriate conduct, there are notions of respect that have been violated, and due regard. So what characterizes workplace bullying a lot is, for lots of other people, they see it as a violation of fundamental treatment and how we should be treated by each other. So it is a conduct issue. And that's one of the ways we talk to supervisors and other people in the organization. It's about conduct. This is not about conflict. This is not about a personality difference. This is about a conduct issue. So we know that. We also, I can give you all the data, but you probably don't need to hear it. Is this harmful behavior?
Yeah.
All right. Does it hurt people on the receiving end?
Yes.
Does it hurt witnesses?
Yes.
Does it hurt the organization?
Yes.
What are some of the ways it could hurt the organization? I was waiting for somebody to go amen. I just realized we were in a call response then. Yes?
High turnover.
High turnover. Bright flight, talent loss. People will leave. Now, the big worry that I often have is that when an economy is very difficult, like ours is, the mobility of people is restricted. So their ability to leave is very, very problematic. Leaving anyway can be problematic. Even if you go to another job, you gotta get used to a new place, you gotta get trained up, you may lose some seniority. I mean, all of the things that might keep you here, the golden handcuffs, right? Might prevent people from going. Yeah?
I was just going to say another one if you there.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So, see the triggering of acute mental health issues.
Yeah. We do see people exposed over an extended period of time, both targets and even witnesses. We actually start to see symptomatology very characteristic of post-traumatic stress disorder. Rumination, hypervigilance, nightmares, that type of stuff. And often how you know if you ever wanted 10 signs that you know you're being bullied. One of them very clearly is, and I think actually you mentioned it, is a job that you used to love. When Sunday night comes around, you start getting sick, or you just feel like, oh God, I have to go in. That's usually a sign that there's something very toxic going on. Okay, yeah?
Reduced productivity and a loss of customers.
Yep. Yeah, and again, that's something an organization often cares a great deal about, right? Like in universities, retention of students, retention of faculty, retention of key staff, recruitment, because their reputation can be affected. Because if stuff with legal fees, because even though there is not legal protection regarding workplace bullying, there is for intimidation and harassment on the basis of protected class, protected status. There isn't formal law, but there is precedent law being developed. So it can become expensive for an organization and institution to have this in the form of lawsuits, but also workers' comp, right? People will take leave. So there's lots of things. So it's expensive along a whole lot of dimensions, physically, psychologically, emotionally. The other thing we have to be concerned about is if someone is repeatedly treated in this manner, they may choose to respond in a manner that you don't really want them to. A classic example was with the Royal Oak Post Office shooting back in the early 1990s. The evidence there was that the man who engaged in the shooting had been systematically bullied by his supervisor, and the organization had not responded despite his repeated request to do so. Does that excuse him from the behavior? No. But it helps us understand and see where there are places we can make changes so that that doesn't have to happen. Okay, so let me just talk a little bit something about that's unique about academic environments and why that might be something that is more or less likely to happen here. One of the things we see in academic environments is we have different groups. So we have faculty, we have administrators, we have staff, and there's all different characters of staff, and we have students. What's very characteristic of faculty, of academics, is we're trained in critique. That's what we do, that's what we get rewarded for. I review articles for journals. I am reviewing and I will critique. I evaluate students. I review and I critique. I have to make arguments in my own articles to challenge certain perspectives. I have to own it, I have to put it on. So we are trained on how to critique. And sometimes we take that outside of our academic relevance and bring it into other people. And then we're surprised when we engage in critique and you guys get upset about it. I think about the staff roles, and there's a really great article by Fratzel and McKay in a really cool edited volume that just came out in December called Workplace Bullying in Higher Education, so that's going to be easy for you to remember. Joel and I have a chapter in there. But the really cool chapter is the one on professional staff and their experiences of this. And one of the ways that they talk about it is that staff roles in universities are built to be and focused on being supportive and cooperative. So now we have a group of employees whose roles are to be supportive and cooperative of the mission of the institution and moving it forward, and they're interacting with another group whose focus is on critique, standing out, and making contributions in that way. So that is an environment that has the potential for at its least a misunderstanding, and at its worst, an escalated situation. So that's part of how we try to talk about that and how we get people to understand it. Part of it is understanding that the norms that work in one relationship may not be the norms that will work elsewhere. So that we engage in ongoing negotiations with each other about how we're going to communicate with each other. This is where in departments, chairs are helpful in terms of reinforcing conduct between faculty and staff, and how faculty are to deal with staff, and helping them understand sometimes that the ways that they do that are problematic. So that's one of the things that I find unique about the academic environment. The other thing that's not just about academic environments, but the kinds of organizational environments we're more likely to see this stuff happen, is environments are more at risk if they're internally competitive and if it's a situation of scarce resources. Does that surprise anybody? Because the video we just saw, this is how she was going to get ahead. This is a competitive environment. There's only a certain number of slots, and I have to be the one that gets it. So those kinds of environments are risky. So we know what the behaviors look like, and I'm going to leave some, I'm not going to go through these slides. You're going to have them in the PowerPoint that I give to you, though. Lots of details about specific behaviors. You guys have given a lot of examples of specific behaviors, but know that it's not the behaviors per se. It is their persistent, enduring nature that is what causes the harm. And because of the process it follows and we tend to escalate, what does that suggest that if you really want to manage this, what you need to do?
Act early.
Act early. Before, as my colleague Charlotte Rain refers to it, the not yet bullied phase. So when we start to see stuff happen. So let's talk a little bit about that. Now you know it's bad, now you know it hurts, now you get your third decision. It's my responsibility to take it on. Let me tell you what we know about what people do try to do. And I'm not going to go through this in detail because the critical point is right here. These triangles indicate what percentage of people who said they've been bullied, what they tried to do. Over 90% of them talk to you. So they're going to you. They talk a lot to other people, and the green indicates when it's successful and the red indicates when it's not. But the first thing that people will do is tell you about it. So this is about what's important about you. They will also go to the formal parts of the organization, like we've talked about, right? HR, ombuds. And from one university we worked with, what we found was that the green indicates, the green looks good, right? Because it says when they went there and took the issue to them, the situation got better. So we're looking for that. What's really dramatic is that hardly anybody does it. People are not taking these things to formal parts of the organization. They're taking them to you. So that's why it's important that you have some ideas about how you can, fairly early on, engage in things. And I think you can imagine why I'm going to argue peer action. So we've talked a lot already. Why do you think it's important that it be you? Or do you want to say, no, it shouldn't be me, Laura? You just described something that's so ugly. I am not going there because it's too risky for me. Why do we think that peer action is important here? Yeah.
Because if we take action to stop bullying, because we worked with a lot of people that are our peers, maybe that'll inspire them or give them confidence in they being able to take action themselves, either as a bystander or as a direct participant.
Right. So it's about being committed to the environment. It's about being committed to show that through your actions and recognize that that has positive implications for other people and inspires them to create environments where this stuff is not as likely to happen. Yeah.
Well, and you can't always trust that the higher ups are going to step up or that they will have the skills to step up. So you only know what you are capable of doing.
And that's a good observation too. The one about higher ups, we don't want to completely beat them up, but one of the things I think it's important to understand is going strictly with a higher up or management response or administrative response is, believe it or not, there are restrictions on these folks. One of them is, for example, and I talked to HR people about this, one of the things that they will talk about is they they almost have a line, and unless the behaviors go above that line, within the organizational structure, they cannot formally act. Now, the question is, could they informally act? Because we can have all sorts of conversations and talk to people in units, and I know HR people in other units that do that. So on some level, they get stuck too, because their policies and procedures so define things that we want to get before it's not yet bullied, but if they're set up to deal just with the bully, then they're kind of going, it's not persistent enough yet, it's not, and they're not blowing it off, they're frustrated too. The other thing is, how do they motivate you to tell them about it? Because I've talked with people who said, well, I kind of heard scuttlebutt, but nobody's telling me about it. I need somebody to tell me about it. I need a witness. I need someone to come forward. So the notion about motivating gets really tough for them too. And then the other part is, they're balancing some other kinds of stuff too. I believe in giving them a chance. But it obviously is not the only thing that you want to be able to do, right? Because by the time you take it formally, it's usually advanced quite a bit, right? And what we want to try to do is have it not be advanced and manage it much earlier on and work with it much earlier on so that the damage is reduced and hopefully non-existent, and people will be better off for it. Other people. I got there and there.
I was just going to say what you mentioned just now, and that is if we're the ones who see it and we're the ones who are told about it and we're the ones who know it first, it usually is closer to the start of the activity. Exactly. And if you can stop it before it escalates or escalates more, it can stop there.
That's exactly right. Because you guys know about it. And that's not saying it's bad that you know. You got to trust what you know. You got to trust that you detect something's not right. You got to trust that there are things that you can do about it. And that whole idea about work climate is defined by all the people who are in the organization. Certainly our leaders can set the tone. Certainly we can have vision statements. We can do all of that stuff. But we're the ones who make it manifest. We're the ones who make it real. Okay? So, you want to look at a scenario and try being bystanders? Not bystanders, being upstanders. You want to do that? Yeah. Okay. I want you in your small groups, and I'm going to give you, each of your small groups gets a choice of the kind of activity that you want. So, I have scenarios that are supervisors bullying single staff, supervisors bullying all their staff. I have colleague to colleague scenarios. I have faculty to staff scenarios. I got just about everything. So you tell me as a group, when I come along, which one you want. Because we don't have to do it all together, because we're going to share some of the options we've had. But tell me what you like. So has everybody got a scenario now? Okay, what I want you to do in your scenario is I want you to read it through and then talk together about, if you were witnessing this, what kinds of options do you have to influence or impact that situation? And identify what those options are. And then we're going to talk about that. And then I'm going to give you a framework for thinking about it.
Something happens, and now all of a sudden,
that's how I roll. I'm just like, the moment I think you're about to hit it, I just.
Okay, everybody, let's get together and talk a little bit. Okay, so we had, each of the groups had a scenario. Some have the same scenario. So what I'd like to do is to have you talk about, each group, give us a Reader's Digest condensed version of your scenario. Very briefly, so the other people who haven't seen the scenario will know what it is. And then I'd like you to talk a little bit. First of all, start off with one of your options, because if we have other groups that also have that scenario, I want to make sure to give them an opportunity to talk about some of the options they gave. So who wants to go first? At the back?
That's only because I have to leave.
Okay.
We have a situation where we have three ladies that have worked together. And
yours is the colleague-to-colleague scenario, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And they've worked together, and they've worked on a situation where they all put in the same number of hours, but one is working 9 to 6 and the other two are working 8 to 5.
Okay.
Economics are hard. There's talk about layoffs. One day the lady comes in that is working the flex hours, the 9 to 6. And it comes up towards lunchtime, and she asked one of the other ladies if she could cover for her during lunch because she has to take her son to the doctor, or her child to the doctor, I guess it was. And the lady that she asked got snippy about it and says, "Oh, it must be nice." You know,
Right.
she came in late. She came in at 9. She made a comment then. Sorry,
Right.
back up.
That's okay. You're doing good.
She came in at 9, and a lady made a snippy comment about working baker's hours, and then later on she asked if this lady would cover for her while she takes her son to the doctor. And the lady just, you know,
Okay, so
flew off the handles and blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
And we've got the third lady who's caught in the trap is, what do I do?
So we have a bystander.
Yeah. And so what we talked about is what this third lady could do to maybe help diffuse the
Okay.
situation, make it a little bit better.
Tell me one of your options. What can she do?
One option was for the third lady to talk to the lady that got snippy and said, you know, "Hey, you seem kind of stressed lately. Is there something going on?
Mhm.
Do you know,
Okay.
we need to talk?"
So she would talk directly to the actor about what she saw and try to find out why it happened. Okay. What other groups had that scenario too? Okay. So we'll go this group, come up with one option, and we'll go to that next group.
Just going with one option?
Let's start, but we'll build them all up because I know you got more, but I want to make sure each group has a chance to say something.
Okay, I'd say that, you know, similarly, sort of try and handle it informally initially,
Okay.
and in the moment as a group when this
Okay.
at the time of this comment, and
what would that look like?
Possibly, you know, the third person saying, you know, okay, you know, to the person who got snippy, you know, maybe you're having a bad day. I'd be happy to cover this scenario for
Okay.
you, as long as that doesn't sort of become a long-term
Yeah, and that's one
issue.
of the things we're going to track, right? Is that some of these approaches you're going to use, you're using in the immediate to manage, but you're also going to want to be able to keep tracking to see if we still keep returning to those behaviors, because then we might have to do something different.
Yeah, so you're just not
Okay.
enabling
So
that to
you're
continue to occur.
one option you had was being active in that moment.
Mhm.
Okay, you were talking about talking to her after the fact, active in the moment. Good. How about this group? Who are my third group? Sorry.
One possibility along with those is to maybe take it to a supervisor and have clarification of flex hours.
Right.
Because, you know,
Could be
getting back to
structural.
something that was mentioned way at the beginning of our session today, and that is how do you get the person exhibiting the behaviors what they want, and perhaps there are alternatives that they just hadn't thought about. So it could be, you know, what is your problem? Oh, I want those hours. Well, let's go see if you can have them.
So because it appears to be a workplace policy, then working with the supervisor on that and bringing them in to talk about the policy and how decisions are made about getting flex. Because somebody could be being frustrated and upset with the system, but they're taking it out on someone who actually has utilized the policy in an appropriate way. What about any other groups that had that one? Okay, what other options amongst those three groups did you have that haven't been mentioned yet? Yeah, go ahead.
You know, similar kind of a formal option of, you know, taking it to the supervisor, you're documenting the incident and bring it to the supervisor's attention, or if you're concerned about, you know, your identity and speaking out about it, you can report it anonymously so that the chain of command knows what's going on.
Okay, so both actions are to bring in a third party. Okay.
We talked about the possibility of the third woman who was observing taking over that lunch and saying, "Hey, you know, I can
Right.
cook for you,"
Right.
and then talking to her afterwards.
Chaining an action, right? So dealing with it immediately at that moment and say, okay, we got coverage now, and then talking about it afterwards.
Well, and also to show that first woman who was being snippy,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna follow you into this situation.
That's right. So in many ways, you're affirming the target, and you're letting them know that the conduct is inappropriate, that there's other ways to handle it. How about the other group? Did you guys have some more?
Yeah, I thought maybe if we were the bystander, we might approach the woman who was targeted directly.
Yeah.
I saw what happened, just wanted I'm here to support you, whatever
Yep.
that looks like.
So connecting and affirming with the target. And believe it or not, that's a very powerful action, particularly if this has been going on for a long time. And there's actually an interesting backstory to that scenario that suggests it goes on and on and on. So the actions that you're suggesting taking would be really good because it would probably stop it from going on and on. But one of the things that's really powerful is when this stuff goes on and on, sometimes targets feel people feel very isolated. And they start blaming themselves and feeling lack of confidence. And the power of you coming up and saying, I saw that, and I don't like it, or how are you feeling, is incredibly powerful. I did that one time in a meeting where and not at my institution, honestly, my prior institution, where we were in a faculty meeting and one of my colleagues was sharing his response to a particular issue on the table, and one of my other colleagues kept talking over top of him, would say things like, nobody cares about what you have to say, and I'm like looking around the room and nobody's saying anything, so I'm thinking, okay, what do I do? So I turned to my colleague who was trying to speak and said, Ian, I would like to hear what you have to say. Tell me more. And then afterwards, so in that moment, what I did, that was a very low risk behavior actually, because I didn't confront the actor, right? I let the target know. And afterwards I went to see him and I said, Ian, what's going on in there? I don't like the way he's treating you. I don't like that he's interrupting you. I don't like that he's talking over top of you. And I'm prepared to do something, but I want your permission. I will do something and I can work with you to figure out what that'll be. And he had two responses. One was he had tears in his eyes and he said, thank you for seeing it and letting me know you saw that. He said, second of all, he said, this is a long history and there are things that I need to do that I'm not, and I need to take care of it in terms of addressing the dynamic. But that stuck in my memory. This man with tears in his eyes thanking me because I saw something and I told him I saw it and what I did in it. No huge grand gesture. And in fact, he felt more emboldened and he actually engaged the other person and talked to them about, this is an old dynamic and I'm tired of it and I don't want it anymore. And the other person said, well, oh, I thought this was fun. No. Okay. Another story. Anything else from the three groups on the colleague to colleague? Cool. Okay, how about another group? What were you working on? What scenario we got? We got supervisor bullying all staff. We got a couple of groups working on that one. This one and this group. Okay. So, three. We got three. Okay. Tell me about an option that you guys came up with. Oh, the supervisor bullying all staff. Do you want to give me the Reader's Digest condensed version for the group?
Sure. There's a supervisor that has worked in an office for 3 years, and her direct supervisor feels that she's doing a great job. She runs the office pretty efficiently. Although all of the staff have been called names in public settings like pinhead and moron, she belittles them. She issues orders like having them check in with her before they leave for the day at 5 o'clock, but doesn't adhere to them herself. She's not around when they're there to check out with her. She denies requests for days off, but then takes days herself. And
you get the picture, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So one staff member complained about a year ago to her direct supervisor, and since then she's bullied this person until the point of quitting.
There's the fear of retaliation part that came true, right? Okay, so what kind of give me one of your options. Give us one of your options. What are you thinking about?
I would think that the direct reports, since they've all noticed this, should maybe come together and go and speak with her supervisor, so it validates that person's, complaint from a year ago.
Okay.
Because like you said, some supervisors are held to certain standards and it can be perceived as a personality conflict versus an actual problem.
Right, versus a conduct issue.
Yeah.
So your suggestion is pulling together with everybody else in the unit, making clear what is happening, and then taking the information, documenting impact, all that, and taking it forward to somebody above that person. Okay? We have two other groups. One at the back and then you guys. What about an option you guys had? What were you thinking about?
We were also, I wasn't really clear as to if we were witnessing this or if we were part of the staff that was having this happen. But we were kind of discussing that maybe we hope we would talk to Jane directly and saying, hey, what's going on? Why are you, I witnessed this behavior, what's going on?
That there are a number of you and that you would actually have a conversation with her about it.
Yeah.
Okay. How about this group?
Well,
Because that's another option.
We talked about that, and then in real life, we also talked about how that backfired.
Okay. Well, and it can be a risky response, right? So it's part that doesn't part of it is not for us to reject it out of hand, but to do it in a thoughtful way and say, what are the potential risks here? Are there ways that we can reduce those risks? And if we can't, then we may want to choose another action, but it is still a possibility. Because sometimes if you've ever run something up a chain, what's one of the first things they'll say to you?
Did you handle it
Did you ever
internally?
talk to her about it? I'm a chair. I get grade appeals, right? Or I get complaints about faculty. And the very first thing we talk about is, have you had a chance to talk to the instructor? Because we want the instructor to have an opportunity. Now, if I'm picking up behaviors that I'm thinking, okay, if a student tells me I can't do it for these reasons, then we work with it in another way.
Well, the other thing we talked about was using I statements right in the moment rather than
Right.
you're doing this to me. It's like, I feel hurt when you call me a pinhead.
Right.
Was that your intention? Like right in the situation, and
So
that's been effective
when you
sometimes.
actually got the behavior, right?
Right.
When it's happening in that moment, it can be very powerful. Now, and as we make an evaluation of any of our actions, what I always like to do, and I encourage other people to do it, is if you have time to plan or think about what the action is you want to take, is work out a number of scenarios. So let's do this one, where we say, you are an idiot. I'm doing this hypothetically. You are an idiot. And you're going to say to me,
I feel hurt when you call me an idiot. Is it really my work product? Why did you call me an idiot?
because you are one. You need to be prepared for that answer. And you can say,
I
okay.
disagree with you. I'm not an idiot. I have a better degree than you do.
Okay.
Now the gloves come off.
Okay.
Just a little role play.
Later we'll go degree to degree. But that, I mean, sometimes we actually forget that one. We actually forget the one about saying it to somebody. Now what we've got here is a scenario where this has gone on for a really long time, and we also have data that somebody's been punished because they brought it forward. So we know there are high risks there, but that still doesn't mean it's not an option. It can be an option, you just need to be prepared with some other, how you're going to deal with those kinds of risks. Now other options that you guys generated, the 3 teams generated on that one? Or did it pretty much cover it? That's a tough one, isn't it? Yeah.
I think the most powerful one was what they mentioned is you really have to have a concerted effort if you're not the only one, because otherwise it will be sidestepped.
Right.
And you want to know how to do that respectfully and firmly, but
Right.
just consistently with, a number of other people.
And the power for people of data is important. So documenting things, and I'm not just talking documenting in a union word language, but actually keeping track of things that are happening. Because that's really, actually what I will do as part of the information I sent you is there's really a cool article out from a colleague of mine about how to tell your story to get other people to understand the significance of it. And part of it is providing evidence, this kind of detail, about what's happened over time. And that can be really, 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 really powerful. So preparing for that conversation can be very helpful, and presenting it to people, because it's very hard for them to dispute something like that. It's also very hard for anybody to excuse name calling. It's really hard. When you said he called me a moron, the only thing we can go with, and that person could respond, no, I didn't. Yeah, but I got 5 people who said you did. Here's one of the powers of you guys, by being observers, bystanders, whatever, is you're more credible. Okay? So I might have called you an idiot, hypothetical. You heard me say that. So when you talk to somebody else, you say, I was there, I heard her say that. That's really going to back her up. We're less likely, it's sad, we're less likely to accept wholeheartedly what a target tells us, but we're more likely to see somebody as a witness who tells us the same thing, that is now more credible. Okay. Any other options that you guys came up with? That was a toughie. That was a real tough, and unfortunately not an unfamiliar situation. Yeah?
Possibly calling a meeting with your supervisor and then that person's supervisor as well, and talking so that it's all out in front of that person.
Right. Yep. So bringing in other kinds of parties and identifying who they are and what their role is and what they could possibly play, and being prepared for that conversation. Okay, how about other scenarios? We had other groups that had other scenarios. What other scenarios we got? No other scenarios?
Yeah, the one.
Oh, we did a faculty staff one back here. Give us a Reader's Digest condensed version about it.
Basically, a professor who is heading a program hires an individual who's the development director with lots of experience, and he's able to give his strategy. And then when this particular professor goes to the dean, he takes responsibility for the other guy's idea. And so, as a result, things become very tense. And so the person who had the idea feels portrayed.
Mhm.
And then things become difficult and people are being critical, or there's a lot of tension in the midst of other employees, and then persons being affected by their health is being affected.
Right, and this faculty member is also escalating the behavior towards the development person, right?
Right. But, yeah.
Because that's an important piece for the crew to understand, that this is not just a one-shot thing this person was doing, that their behavior towards the target escalated, right? Okay, so what do you think? I think you're our only crew who decided to take on a faculty staff thing, so what were some of the options you were thinking about?
One of our ideas was to, as this gentleman said, is to tell the truth. So the next time that you're around the dean, you bring it up and he says, oh yeah, that was a really great idea of the professor's. Like, no, I think that was Kevin's idea, the person who was brought in. So really, yeah, we were there.
So providing other information to somebody who's in a position of power. Okay. How about other options? You're the only ones who did this scenario, so you get to talk about more options.
That was the main thing that we talked about.
Okay,
but
that's cool.
The other thing is what other people have already brought up. You provide backup. Say, yeah, I did see that. I'm on your side.
Okay, so talking to the target and saying, this is what I've seen. Okay.
You could go as a group. Just, I mean, all the other things that people have said work equally well in this situation.
And they could potentially be very helpful. Okay. Now we had other groups that had other scenarios. Who else have we got?
We had a supervisor and single staff.
Okay, supervisor on a single staff. Give us a Reader's Digest condensed version of that one.
In this situation, the target is Jim, who's been in his position for about 5 years. He gets a new supervisor who wants the office to be more efficient. And Ed seems to single...
You know where this is going.
Ed seems to single Jim out, changes his hours to a stricter time schedule.
Than everybody else.
Stops by his desk every 30 minutes. Repeatedly, if he's seen, even chatting for a moment with a colleague, he's told to go back to his desk, but nobody else is instructed to go back to their desk. And he seems to be kept under thumb quite strictly. Okay. And so we looked at various things he could do.
Yeah.
Including documenting behavior, like saying
things he can do, but what you could do is people who are aware of this.
But also advising him, saying, all right,
okay,
Jim, if
you
he
can
really
advise the target.
If he really is going by your desk every 30 minutes, make a note of that. Say 5:35, you walk by again.
Yeah. Right.
And also as witnesses, saying, okay, I just saw Ed go by there 3 times in a row for no apparent reason.
What's up with that?
And just kind of making notes and making our own awareness of that. And then if other staff are seeing it, maybe getting together with Jim after work saying, dude, we know what's going on.
Right.
We support you. We're here for you.
And then you guys can strategize.
Yeah. And if it needs to go higher up, if we need to go in as witnesses too.
So you can do some planning together. So starting first of all by noticing what's going on, giving suggestions to the target about how they might want to monitor that, or how they might want to record some information, doing your own recording of the information. And if the situation isn't changing, then we may want to do something. You want to go talk to the supervisor?
I personally don't.
It's an action. It's an option. Yeah.
Well, one of the other things that came to mind was specifically the ombuds office, because if the supervisor is new to the university and may not understand things about culture, it might be more appropriate to bring in a mediator to say, hey, this is how we do things here.
Right.
Just kind of getting somebody else involved who's perhaps more of a neutral party.
The question is, do you really want a neutral party? Or do you really want a party who will stipulate what the conduct is, how one does supervisory duty?
It depends on the nature of
One of the challenges with workplace bullying, as you can imagine, is I'm a dispute resolution person, so mediating, arbitrating, all of that other good stuff, negotiating too. Workplace bullying for me is one of those situations that I do not believe should be mediated. If it's an established relationship, the assumption in mediation is that all parties are capable of being at the table and capable of fully participating. If somebody is in a long-term bullying relationship, they are usually not able to fully be present at the table and to defend and articulate and negotiate at that time. And so then one of the challenges I face as a third party in that role is, by being neutral and being present, am I actually condoning the behavior? So that's a challenge. But there are times when I think it's appropriate. But for me, not in a bullying situation. How about other people? Did we cover everybody's scenarios? Everybody get a chance to talk? You came up with some really good ideas. And I want to help you think about a way to characterize them in a more, oh, what happened? In a more systematic way. What happened? Oh, there we go. It fell asleep. I'm sorry. And I'm thinking you're falling asleep. Really? It's rough when your computer falls asleep on you. All right. Let me give you a framework for thinking about this a little bit more systematically. And here again, you make decisions. So we've come to that point where you've decided you need to do something, and you're thinking about what that action is. We've had some opportunities to talk together about some actions. But let me point out a couple of things that you do. And what I noticed, and maybe a lot of you noticed, is that people differed in their level of involvement in the actions, the options that they chose. So one is the level of involvement, your willingness to take action publicly or not. And that ranges all the way from not getting involved at all to putting yourself in the episode. So some examples were, in that moment with those two people, I would say, that's a high involvement situation. Others of you talked about a little later on or much later on talking to the person or going to a supervisor. That's a low level of involvement. Low doesn't mean bad. It's just saying whether you're putting yourself out there publicly or not. The other episode of it is immediately. How immediately are you going to deal with it? Are you going to do it now, or are you going to deal with it later? And when we cross these two, if you cross, so we can engage in actions that are high involvement, high immediacy, high involvement, low immediacy, low involvement, low immediacy, and my other one, low involvement, high immediacy. So let me just talk about this one first. Low immediate, low involvement. Look at the kinds of actions here. So here, you don't want to be publicly seen to be doing what you're doing, so that everybody's aware of it, and you're going to be doing it a little later on, or much later on. So one of those options is to advise the person, give the target some advice, which is what the number of you talked about, talking to the target after the experience, or what you saw happening, and give them some advice about gathering data, about you need to talk to them or take it somewhere else. Sometimes one of the advice is maybe there's a way to, in the moment or for a while, avoid this actor. There's a way that we can keep you out of contact with them for a while we try to figure out something else. Covertly, you can covertly keep an actor away from a target. So, for example, in a meeting where one of my colleagues might be doing that stuff, interrupting and all that other stuff, I can just try to distract them and say, oh, what about if we get back to this issue about this? In that moment, I've drawn the attention away from what's happening over here. Now, ultimately, I may want to do something more, so that's probably not the only thing I'm going to do. But how many of you have kids or worked with young people? You know the power of distraction. When they've got a mission and they're heading somewhere and you don't want them to head there, one of the most powerful tools you have, particularly with really young ones, is to distract them. It works with adults too. Ooh, look, something shiny. Okay. If you see, for example, if you see something happening in the hallway, we've got a scenario where somebody's being berated in the hallway, and you're coming along, you can break that interaction by saying, "Oh, Jennifer, did you forget about the meeting? Come on, we got to go." So I break it in that moment, and I get the target out of there, or sometimes I'm getting the actor out of there, but I want to break that interaction in that moment. So. You can advise them to report it. These are all examples of things you could do that would fall under this category. Low risk behaviors, much lower risk behaviors, but they do have an influence. More broadly, the phone call that Lorraine, our actor, was having in the video with one of her coworkers telling her how I was doing all this stuff, blah, 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 blah. Refusing to engage in it. Challenging that. If somebody's sharing gossip and rumors about somebody else, don't pass it on, right? That's one of the ways you can end that behavior fairly quickly, is by refusing to participate in it. You don't have to say, I'm not going to pass it on, but you just don't. Or you can say, if you want to be more involved, I don't think that's true. I don't like what you just said. I don't think it's wise for you to say those kinds of things. That's another level of involvement. So there's a variety of things that would fall under that category that you could do. Now let's say You want to do it now. The situation is happening now and you want to do something. So I talked about you could redirect somebody, I could redirect the actor, you could remove the target, interrupting the incident, and we do it in lots of different ways. One of the ways I've interrupted an incident is, I think one of you guys also mentioned this. You heard something, and so you came out and made yourself visible to the people involved. That will interrupt an incident. I did that one time when I heard a faculty member, not at my current institution, honestly, and they were arguing with, and they've been in a very difficult relationship here with a doctoral student, and they were very loud. And I came out of my office, I came to the door, and I stood there, and then they look at me and they go, "What?" I said, "If you're going to keep this up, you might want to close the door, or you might want to talk differently." And then I walked off. And the dynamic actually changed quite dramatically. It's amazing how quickly you can change a dynamic. One of my favorite studies is how the mere presence of somebody fundamentally changes what two people will do with each other. You just being present changes the dynamic. So if something's happening or somebody's giving it to somebody else, you being visible and being present, hopefully not being interpreted as condoning it, right, and not joining in, but being present changes the dynamic because now somebody becomes aware there's an audience. And so you can use that to your advantage and to the advantage of the target. Low immediate, you're going to handle it after the fact. High involvement, which means you are taking it on. So some of you talked about taking it to the supervisor, reporting it up, taking it to the identifying those people and taking it to them. And we talked about preparing for that, accompanying the person when they go to talk about it, so that they have support. And again, remember, you potentially are the one who also saw that, so you give them additional credibility, additional legitimacy. And if they're particularly distressed, you can be a calming influence and help them tell their story and corroborate their story at the same time. A number of you talked about talking to the person about what you saw. You talked to the target and said, "Hey, I saw that." That seemed to be a really strong option for a lot of you, and I'm glad to hear that. You can talk to the actor afterwards, and there was an example where people did that. Afterwards, they talked to the person and said, "Why are you doing it this way?" That's a problem. We can handle that another way. So talking to an actor. More broadly, if you think this is an issue for the institution, for your units and whatnot, maybe what you want to do is step up and commit yourself to working with a group to develop and enhance the policies and procedures and implement them to help address these kinds of things. That's another level of action for you as someone who's seen stuff happening. And do what we call building the business case, which is gathering the data and showing how these kinds of behaviors, these kinds of relationships become costly for the unit, for the organization, and for the individuals. And the final category is you're going all out, high immediate, you're there, and you're going to be highly involved. Telling the actor to stop it. Anybody done that? Tell an actor to stop what they're doing? Yeah.
I was actually in a meeting with faculty, and I told the faculty member to stop saying what he was saying to me and apologize.
Good. Or somebody else can talk about that, can say, I remember saying to one of my colleagues one time in a meeting where they were going on about something, and I looked at them and I said, "I think you are going to need to be careful about what you just said, because now all of us have heard it, and we won't forget." I wasn't threatening. Name or acknowledge it. I've heard people say to other people, the witnesses say to the other actor, and to the target, "What's happening to you is bullying and it's wrong." So naming it, and one of the most powerful experiences people have on the receiving end of this is how we help them understand what's happened to them. And when they finally have a name for it, and one of the coolest websites going is one called workdoctor.com by Gary and Ruth Namey, who've been doing this work for like 15 years. And when I get calls, and I get a lot of calls from people in organizations who have been targeted, or from family and friends. I get calls from spouses and other coworkers talking about this experience. One of the first things I do is get them to go there because of all of the information that is there. They've done a phenomenal job there. And often I'll get feedback saying, that was a very helpful first step for me because now I know I'm not alone and now I know it's something real. Don't underestimate the power of that, guys. Sharing that information with somebody so that they can start to see that it's not about them, but that it's about something else. And getting others to publicly denounce it. So these are the more public statements. So there's a whole range of possibilities that you have to do. Does that seem right? Do you feel like you have a little bit more room to maneuver? Okay, two things we're going to do. One is I'm going to give you, for your own experiences, where's my handout? Ah, here it is. We've talked about a number of ways about way to approach things. I'm going to give you an action planning sheet for you. And I'm not going to have you work on it now, but I want to give it to you as a tool for examining and assessing the kinds of situations that you see, and for you considering what you might want to do. Tom, would you mind handing this out while I continue? Thank you. I found this, I developed this in preparing for you guys. They've got it already. In preparing for you guys, because I thought I wanted you to have something that you would take and it would help you think through systematically and thoughtfully all the things you might need to consider in taking action. Now, having said that, if you're in the moment, you probably are going to have your action plan sitting in front of you and you're not going to be sure what to do. Think about what workplace bullying is. It's a persistent thing, so usually you have some indication, but also being prepared with some statements of your own. So you know the kinds of behaviors that you don't think are appropriate. You do not think it's appropriate to talk with somebody and tell them that what they have to say is not important, right? I mean, that's an example. So if you run into that, you need to be prepared to have one of your statements available or one of your actions available, like what I did, which was turn to the person and said, I would like to hear what you have to say. So that for those kind of immediate things, you can do that.